All right, what's up, everybody? How are you all doing on this beautiful Wednesday? At least it's beautiful over here in Phoenix. I don't know about everybody else. Joseph, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Looking forward to today's conversation.
Should be fun. So we've been teasing it a little bit on LinkedIn for the last few days, at least, both you and I think. We're talking about what we call relationship enablement. And a piece of advice I got from a mentor a while ago is words matter, use them wisely. And this is where, one of those times where I think the way that you name something and the way you describe it makes a big difference in the mindset that it creates and how it gets executed and all that fun stuff. So, all right, looks like we got some people coming in. If you're here, pop a message in the chat, say hi, let us know you're here. Feel free to ask questions as we go. We'd love to answer them as we go. Something interesting. We had a guest on our one of our recent podcast interviews, the Master Marketer Show. And for those that listen, we ask one of the lightning round questions is, what's your least favorite business word or phrase? And one of the last people that we interviewed said smarketing. I haven't heard that word in a while, and I tend to agree that word has always rubbed me the wrong way too. It's the combination of sales and marketing working together. It all sounds great in theory, but I think it creates, again, I think the wrong mindset. Hey, Kristen, good to see you. So it really it made me think, because it ties into the topic today, right? It's, yes, we want sales and marketing to work together, but I think the way that most do it is flawed in the mindset. And I think, speaking of words mattering and definitions, you generally hear things like sales enablement. Right. And people might think, well, relationship enablement, sales enablement, same thing. Who cares? You're just putting a different spin on it. I will explain why we disagree with that. So if you think sales enablement, really the objective of sales enablement is for marketing to enable sales to sell better and faster, maybe you can say. But it's very seller centric. Right? It's about the seller. On the flip side, more recently, people have talked about buyer enablement, right? Buyer enablement experiences and all that. That's great. That's obviously more customer centric. The problem that you run into, at least that we've seen, is those two things, buyer enablement and sales enablement, generally don't seem to play well together. They're almost like at odds with each other. It's like you're creating separate experiences for the buyer and separate experiences for the seller, and it just doesn't, again, the mindset is incorrect in the sense of it's almost putting the buyer, it's like a buyer versus seller mentality in the sales enablement play, or the smarketing definition. It's almost the sales versus marketing mentality seems to be there. And the mindset that we want to posit, and Joseph and I are going to talk about and dig into here, is that the relationship between buyer and seller is what matters. We want to build and enable a quality relationship between the buyer and the seller. So the relationship is the focal point. It's not separate experiences here and separate experiences there. It's how can we create experiences that are going to empower the buyer and the seller to work together, to talk, to converse, to learn about each other, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the definition of what we call relationship enablement. And some of the tactics as we dive into them might sound similar to what you might be doing anyway, but it's what's behind them that matters. It's the mindset behind the tactics that really drives the success. So the goal of relationship enablement, and I promise I'm going to get off my little virtual podium here, and Joseph and I will go back and forth a bit. I'm going to tell a story. But the purpose of relationship enablement is to create experiences, like I said, that allow both sales and marketing to work together to build a relationship with the buyer. So I'm going to give an example of this, and even more detail is to create assets that can be used in this way, marketing assets that can be used in both sales and marketing, inbound, outbound, etc. So here's a story for you. For those of you who followed us for a while, you've probably either seen or maybe you've received as a gift or as a winner of a contest one of our marketing deck of cards, right? I'll actually, Joseph, if you want to, while I'm chatting, if you want to grab that from the site, pop a link in there in case people don't know what it is, because that might help illustrate the story a bit. Pop it in the chat there. So there's been a number, again, it's been live since last holiday season, previous holiday season, not this last one, but the previous one. So for over a year. And we use it from a business development perspective. We'll send things as gifts. We'll bring it up when it makes sense, etc. So here's why I'm bringing this up. There's been a number of people I've been trying to get in touch with for a while, right? And it's not just from an outbound perspective, but trying to connect with them and engage with them on LinkedIn, things like that. And some people is harder than others. And with one of these people, an opportunity came up to use this asset. So, something was mentioned where they had also created her company also created some of the swag, and also happened to be a deck of cards. And I said, "Oh, cool. Hey, we did a similar thing. We went a step beyond. We did custom design with custom illustrations, et cetera, whatever." And I posted a link. That's it. The response was, "Hey, this is really cool." I forget the exact wording there. And then I responded with, "Hey, do you want me to send you a deck? Would love to," which I did. And lo and behold, that turned into a conversation, which turned into a request for, "Hey, I'd love to learn more about what you all do," etc. My intent with that was strictly to start a conversation to build a relationship. I wasn't trying to sell anything at that point. Okay. But it's the ability to take existing assets and experiences and use them for outbound as well as for inbound. Right? We did an inbound campaign with those cards. We were able to use it for outbound. Again, this is a little bit more, I don't want to call it left field necessarily, but it's not your typical thing. It's a physical item that we were able to use in this way. But you can do the same thing with events, with virtual events, with podcasts, with all sorts of things. So I'm going to stop there. Joseph, I think you wanted to tell a story as well.
Yeah, I think the key point about sales enablement versus what we're talking about with relationship enablement is a mindset. It's sales enablement is focused on how can we better enable the sales team to do their jobs, to get transactions faster, and kind of feeds into the same ideas that lead gen does of, okay, we know that by our sales team talking to X number of people, then they're going to be able to close deals. And if you're not doing anything, enabling your sales team is great. But what I've seen happen from that, from personal experience and just what I've seen working with clients, is that marketing ends up just becoming an extension of the sales team, and the work that marketing is doing becomes more and more transactional over time. And in the short term, it probably does produce more results, but then you're destroying future growth by doing that. Whereas the idea behind relationship enablement is we want to build something that has returns indefinitely, where it's like investing in the stock market with your money instead of pulling money out and just spending it. You're spending your relational equity when you're doing typical cold outreach, when you're doing typical, sales outreach, instead of investing that and building something that's going to grow. Another illustration I've been thinking about is, people like talking about hacks, and I feel like a sales enablement a lot of times gets into the hacky things, like what's working right now, how do we get our sales team the materials they need to use this new hack. And I was thinking, man, hacks tend to always produce short-term results and destroy what you're doing. And I had this picture pop into my head of an apple tree, and we're getting ready to plant some apple trees, so they're on my mind. But it was somebody saying, "Hey, look, I have a hack to get apples faster," and they cut down the tree. And yes, it's a literal hack, and yes, you will get apples from the top of the tree faster, but you're literally cutting down the tree that bears fruit. So we want to create something that's building rapport and relationships over time. And I think the key difference is in your intent in the way that you interact with people. So what we want to do is use marketing content to start conversations with our ideal customers. And yes, our goal in that is to lead to sales conversations. So we're not talking about something that's completely passive where we're saying it's fully buyer-led. We're going to let them enter whenever they want. No, we want to create ways for the sales team to be able to interact in a positive way with our ideal customers. And so we want to design things that specifically make it easy for the sales team to engage with people in an authentic way. Versus your typical buyer-led is just, we're going to wait for the buyer to show up whenever they're ready. And sometimes it's too late. We want to get in before they define their requirements. We want to get in and help them understand what their needs actually are, so that we can position whatever we do as filling their needs better than the competition. And if it's completely buyer-led, we're kind of waiting until that happens. Whereas we want to get in early, but we don't want to pitch. Like, I just, while we're on this live, got pitched on LinkedIn, and they're like, "Hope you don't mind my persistence." And it's like I kind of do. Actually, it's annoying. You have no relationship with me at all. And yet you're trying to take a meeting. You're trying to take my time that I could be doing something else. And I don't see any benefit in doing that. So, how do we turn the tide on that? And, again, I'll tell a story here that shows there's value in building relationships with people in your ICP and people in the industry, not having any idea or putting too much emphasis on where that conversation is going to lead. It's just starting conversations with people. So I'm going to tell a story of how Mike and I met originally and how I ended up on this LinkedIn Live ultimately. So I had posted a poll on LinkedIn about lead generation versus demand generation. And it did pretty decent, but one guy commented on it and gave a really good definition of demand generation, and that was Mike. And so after Mike posted that comment, I responded to it, and then I reached out to him directly and said, "Hey, Mike, that was we'd never interacted before, but I was like, man, that comment about demand generation was great. There's a lot of buzzwords around it, around that term, but I think you gave a great definition. I'd love to have you on my podcast to talk about the difference between lead generation and demand generation." At that point, I didn't really know that much about Proofpoint. I wasn't really looking to do anything except for build relationship with Mike because he's smart, and I wanted to grow rapport, and he saw that as an opportunity to grow his personal brand and come on the show. So there was a win-win for both of us, but we didn't have some grand scheme that we were looking to have happen. So then he comes on the show. We have a great conversation, and at the end, I was thinking about launching my own business at that point. So I'm asking him, "Hey, how do you go about building relationships at scale without annoying the crap out of people? Would you be open to chatting with me and giving me some, essentially advice on how to do that?" So we had a separate call. we're talking about it. I really appreciated his approach. And then Mike said on that call, hey, I just have this job opportunity that just opened up. I think he'd be a good fit. And that's how I ended up coming to work at Proofpoint. So the point of that is I was creating content on LinkedIn for people in my ICP. I made it really easy for Mike to be able to engage with that content and to have a conversation that got started. Then I used my podcast as a way to reach out to Mike, to build relationship with him and start a conversation that otherwise would have been really challenging. Then I had a follow-up to that furthers that conversation and put Mike in the position of being a trusted advisor and, had that conversation go further. And then little known to both of us at the start of that call, it ended up leading to a great, my 1 year at Proofpoint's coming up here, a great year so far, and looking forward to a lot more time from that. And so we want to take some of the idea of relationship enablement is taking a lot of those same things that Mike and I were doing there and applying that to your marketing and sales process. So how do we kind of take all of those pieces and tie them together to build relationships? And I know I monologued there. So like my final thought on that of the whole story is the difference is building relationships doesn't always lead to a sale. And if we're looking for how to make every conversation that the sales team has a sales conversation, it's going to be transactional. Instead, it's figuring out how do we create content that on its own starts to qualify somebody so that when the sales team gets on with them, we know it's not a total waste of the sales team's time. But then when the salesperson gets on with them, they're in the position of a trusted advisor, not the salesperson. So they're helping that person. They're giving them something that's valuable to them that naturally leads into a sales conversation, but could end with just, hey, it was great connecting. And then maybe in 2 months down the road or 3 months, it turns into something else, but you've started that conversation in a positive way versus as a pitch.
Yeah, I think the other way to think about it is the objective isn't to get the sale directly, but to influence sales in general, right? So think about really one of the goals would be is making the referral channel actually a scalable thing. Because you can build relationships with not just best fit customers, you can build relationships with external influencers that can help, drive business. You can build relationships. And again, when I say influencers, I use that term very loosely, meaning it could be an actual industry influencer, but it could also just be somebody else that works in the space. And while they might not be buying in buying mode or might not be buying from you, if you build up a good enough rapport and become seen as a trusted advisor, they might recommend you without ever having bought from you before, right? And if you can scale, that is a scalable thing. Actually, I think that's the piece that many forget. And again, I'm not going to bring up the slide. If you've been to our lives before, you've seen and if you follow us on LinkedIn, you've seen the relationship pyramid slide in the past. Pretty much it's, there's various vectors of influence out there to drive decisions and revenue. And oftentimes people focus on strictly decision maker, and you don't have to. And for that matter, you shouldn't only focus on decision maker. So, one of the other things I want to maybe come back to real quickly, Joseph, that you mentioned is the whole hacks conversation. We literally just had a discussion about this with a client yesterday. We were doing some LinkedIn activation training, and one of the things that they were asking about is what's the right way to connect and things like that on LinkedIn. And if anybody remembers, at one point, every single maybe about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more, every single LinkedIn guru or sales, social selling guru was saying, oh, just send blank requests. Right. And we were saying the same thing. We were seeing some success with it. I think the problem that happens is that a lot of people look for hacks, like Joseph was saying. And rather than having the right mind, it's the mindset behind it that's important. So what you see now is the effectiveness of blank connect requests on LinkedIn has actually decreased. Why? Because people are all they've done is they've just moved their pitch back a step. So before, people would do they pitch right in the connect request. That stopped working. So like, okay, well, everyone's saying to just do a blank connect request. Let's do that. So everybody starts doing it. And what happens as soon as you connect with them? They pitch you the pitch slap. It's awesome. Not really. Right. So now everybody's wary of blank connect requests because a lot of these people just used it as a hack to get higher connect rates, but the effectiveness is actually the same. For people that are doing that, at least.
Actually, it's probably worse because
possibly
it's a bait and switch. At least when you send it to me in the connection request, I can just ignore you.
I can choose to ignore it. Yeah, exactly.
And that way, it's like sneaky.
Yeah, I think the reason I bring that up is more of a illustration of. We'll talk about some tactics here really shortly, but I do want people listening to take away, like, don't just take the tactics away, because it's easy to take any of those tactics and honestly bastardize them to the point where they're no longer effective and they're doing the opposite thing that they're meant to do. So we want people to really understand this mindset about it. It is about building an effective relationship with the right people so that you can accelerate revenue growth.
They say that only 2 to 3% of people are typically in the market at any given time. So that's where pitching, you've got to hit the exact pain points at the right time and usually be the low cost solution if somebody's already in market, or have major differentiation to be able to hit somebody and really get them when they're there. And so this is, if you're building relationship, you're able to engage the 97, 98% of other people that are out there. And then maybe they won't be in market for another 5 years. But to Mike's point, as we do customer interviews, what's one of the number one things that I hear across the board? Oh, I ask peers about what I should do. I talk to other people who are in the same place. And there's a lot of people out there that don't like their current vendor, but they're stuck with them for whatever reason. That person might recommend you over their current vendor. If you've built rapport with them in relationship, they might recommend you to a peer. And I've done that multiple times in the past where I have a relationship with somebody. I've never personally worked with them, but I want to. I wish that I could. And so I recommend them to somebody else. And then if that goes well, I keep recommending them again and again and again until hopefully I get to the point where I can use them. And I can think of 3 or 4 people that I've recommended, and they've done great work, and I've kept recommending them without ever having worked with them before. And if you're only focused on getting the sale and only focused on decision makers, you miss out on the opportunity to build those kinds of relationships with people.
Yep. So let's dive into the, we've been talking really high level here for a bit. I think we've illustrated the point enough. Really the way, one other thing to think about is how can you maximize the leverage you have from any given set of assets? Right. So oftentimes what you'll see is you'll have organizations that will have separate assets that they'll use for inbound campaigns, separate assets for outbound outreach for their sales team, like the traditional sales enablement type content. You'll have separate assets for ABM, all this kind of stuff. And one of the things to think about is you don't always need that. For that matter, we'll argue, oftentimes you can use the same assets just in a different way. It depends what context you put them in. So take an event like this. Okay, this is actually one of the things we often, one of the playbooks we often run with our clients is some sort of live event based on pain points that we know or common questions that are asked, things like that. And you can use that from a content creation perspective, right? So we're literally doing this. This gets recorded. We're going to cut it up. Joseph and I are going to have separate clips. We're hopefully both going to say something smart here, or maybe already did. That can be used for company content on our company page. It can be used in ads that we potentially run. So video ads to drive inbound. It can be used for personal branding, and it can also be used for outbound, right? So let's assume and it can be used at various stages in outbound too. So let's assume there is somebody that we're speaking with where maybe we've already started the conversation around relationship enablement as a service offering. We could send them a link to this, like, hey, in case you want more detail that we were able to talk about, check this out, right? So it could be used as a follow-up. We can use it. Maybe somebody post a comment on LinkedIn that talks about struggling with, I'm totally making this up, but struggling with sales enablement. Oh, hey, by the way, we actually think of it differently. Here's some content you may find interesting, right? So now you're using it that way. There's a bunch of ways you can repurpose this type of asset and build into kind of vectors in and out of it. So Joseph, you're sort of technically the mastermind of our relationship enablement process here. You want to talk through that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think some of these things seem very similar to typical lead gen tactics. And in some ways they are, but I think the main difference is as marketers, we need to think more like salespeople, and salespeople need to think more like marketers. And that's really what we're trying to do through this process. So as a marketing person, my goal isn't just to build affinity with people. That's part of it. It's to get that person to want to have a conversation with the sales team and to make it as easy as possible for the sales team to have a genuine conversation. Because I've been in sales before. The easier it is to start that conversation. That's the hardest part, right? About outbound is you don't know who this person is. You're trying to get that hook. You're trying to personalize. You're trying to do all of that. Well, the less that you have to do that, and the more that somebody is just already interested, or they showed up to an event. They said that they're going to attend an event. There's a good reason for me to reach out to them then and follow up compared to totally cold outreach. Or even in my totally cold outreach, if I have something to send them that's valuable and I saw something that they posted and I comment on it and then start a conversation through a DM and send it to them, that's much better for the sales team. And then from a sales perspective, if you're always just looking to close a deal like we talked about, then that's not going to go very far. So how do we bridge those two things together? The main thing that we do here is doing live events like this. Some of them for customers are more presentation driven. Some of them are going to be more like this, where we have two subject matter experts from the team dialoguing about a topic. And then what we do for clients is have some kind of a follow-up. Usually it's some kind of a download that somebody can download. And the goal of that download isn't to collect their contact information so the sales team can call and pitch them. The goal of that piece of content is, one, to qualify them. So you have to think of something that by that person downloading that, they're saying, this is a topic that I'm interested in solving, or this is something I'm actually interested in dealing with. So to me, those things need to be very action oriented, like some kind of a calculator or a worksheet, or it could also be like a mini course or something like that, something that the person takes action to do that.
Something that shows intent, right? Like that, the idea is, how can you, from a first party data perspective, understand their intent and take action on it?
Yeah, so I've seen it in the engineering space multiple times where calculators are really helpful. Engineers want to understand the cost, or they want to understand how much time they're spending on something, or something like that. And they have to go try to figure that out on their own. It's complicated. There's usually a lot of formulas they'd have to figure out. Well, if you can do that work ahead of time and just serve that up to them so they can have an Excel sheet to manage something specific, or they can have a calculator that calculates hours, or something that I've personally used in the past is like a customer profile worksheet. And somebody could download that and actually fill it out. It's like a worksheet that you can use to build out your own customer profile. So things like that are very action oriented, but they tell you that person is actively trying to do something. The reason that's important is you don't want to just send a college student that's doing research for their project to your sales team. That's a huge waste of their time. And it's something that's going to annoy your sales team incredibly fast, and they're not going to take you very seriously. But then on the flip side, it also makes it really easy for the sales team to start a sales-oriented conversation with that person. So the way we've recommended it is somebody downloads this calculator. Your sales team, somebody from your sales team can then reach out to them and say, hey, I'd love to sit down with you for 30 minutes, take a look at that worksheet and give you some pointers and talk that through with you we typically see that people are missing some information around this particular part of the worksheet. I'd love to sit down with you and help you figure that out. If that person responds yes, that's going to be a much more productive conversation than your typical pitch, and calling 30 of these people that have downloaded the ebook. So then when that person gets on the call, you're in the position at that point, or your salesperson's in the position of a trusted advisor. So they're going to walk through the worksheet. They're going to give some pointers, examples. And then at the end of that call, super easy to turn into a sales conversation with one line. Hey, would you like any more help with this? We have this process that we do to help people go from where you are right now with this worksheet. And, totally depending on what you're doing, but it could be, hey, look, there's a lot of manual work involved for you to be able to take this and go to the next level. We do all of that for you. Or it could be, hey, this was the prerequisites to what you need. We can take it from there and, really help you. So then if that person says yes, you now have a sales conversation that was built on trust, built on relationship, built on that salesperson being a trusted advisor, instead of just cold calling as many people as you can from getting their email list from an ebook or something like that.
Well, that's also why, right, we generally, for the most part, stay away from the ebook and white paper, because it's not to say that those don't have a place at all in marketing anymore, but it's that those, like somebody downloading one of those, doesn't really show intent. All it does is shows intent to research. It doesn't show intent to solve a problem. I'm researching a problem. Now, if that ebook at the end contains some sort of worksheet or a guide or whatever, great. Now you can follow up potentially and say, hey, out of curiosity, did you fill out the worksheet? No, I did. Okay, cool. Right? Or, yeah, I did. And, whatever. I struggled to fill in X, Y, and Z. Great. Do you want some help with that? Right? It opens up the idea is, how can you open up a conversation about not necessarily the topic of selling something, but a conversation that allows you to show your domain expertise. Right?
Yeah, and it's actually funny because it also plays into the messaging side of things as your company, because a lot of times when we're working with B2B companies on their messaging, and we have other lives about developing messaging and go-to-market messaging, but one thing that comes up a lot is that companies like using a lot of buzzwords and they like talking about themselves. And so what you'll see a lot in B2B companies is, we have the experts, our team is the best, we have 175 years of combined experience, all these things that are probably true. And you probably do have experts in that particular area. The challenge is that so do your competitors, and they say exactly the same thing. So when you say we have the experts, it doesn't really mean anything. And so something that I like to say is, you have to show your expertise, not tell people that you're an expert. And you do that by getting your subject matter experts on your team to create content. And to Mike's point about how you can reuse that, it's a big challenge for companies to get their subject matter experts to create content and post content. If you get them involved in a LinkedIn live event like this, you can get clips from that they can use on their personal profile, or that you can share on your company page. You can share micro clips from that. So there's so much that you could use these pieces of content for in your marketing, in your sales, and kind of break it into pieces. I think one other piece that is important, and I know we're kind of sharing a lot of information here, so it's probably getting into information overload at this point, but then this resource is something that lives on. So you want your campaigns to be on something that is fairly evergreen, as in it's not going to go out of date in 2 months from now. It's something that's a core to your business. So over the next year or 2 or 3, your sales team has a resource that they can send to people, like Mike was referencing in the sales process. So, we're having a conversation about relationship enablement with a customer. I can always send them back to you, or I could say, hey, we have a worksheet for designing a webinar that's going to attract people to come. Would you be open to me sending that to you? And then they say yes. I send that to them. Then I send them, a couple of these events that we've done along with that. And then it's a lot easier for me to have a good reason to follow up with that person. I'm not saying, hey, just bumping this back to the top of your inbox, or, just wanted to see if you read my last 5 messages I sent you where you haven't responded. Instead, I have
It's a conversation starter.
Yeah, exactly. It's a conversation starter. It's a great way.
I mean, that's the idea behind the entire playbook, whatever the tactical elements are, is creating opportunities to start conversations. Because that's the hardest part especially for, say, newer salespeople. I mean, there's people out there, they can start a conversation with anybody about anything out of the blue, and some people are just really, really, really good at that. Most are not. So, but the difference, like, again, and the order of operations can be flipped too. So I'll go there in a second maybe, but take an event like this. You can easily follow up with people who attend and be like, hey, what'd you think? That's it. Literally just give them your call to action is, what did you think? Or did you find the content valuable? You're forcing them to to a certain extent, you're forcing their hand to either say, nope, I didn't think it was valuable. I don't think it was stupid. All right, well, that's probably important for us to know. Hey, marketing, we probably need to have events about something different because we got some feedback. People thought this was dumb. All right. Or on the flip side, yeah, I thought that was valuable. Cool. Anything in particular? Well, yeah, this one, this, that, and the other was interesting. Oh, that's great. And usually they're going to give you more context, which then potentially opens the door for you to either shift into a sales conversation or shift into a more consultative type thing. Oh, that's interesting. You're struggling with that. Well, we don't actually help with that, but we have some experts on the team. Would you like to chat with so and so? Whatever. Again, it depends on the type of business. That this type of interaction might not always be possible, but that's the idea, right? And you can do the same thing with the downloadable, for example. Your follow up might be, hey, did you find that valuable? I saw you downloaded this. Did you find this valuable? No, I didn't. All right, why not? Or, yeah, this is really helpful. We were just working through XYZ. I'll give maybe more a specific example. Like we were working with a med tech engineering firm a little while back, and one of the downloadables for them was that we helped develop is the product requirements guide or worksheet, right? So a follow up from there could be, hey, were you able to fill this out? Did you struggle with any of it? Nope, everything was straightforward. Cool, great. Or, yeah, you know what, this part didn't really make sense. We weren't really sure what to go there. Awesome. Do you want to jump on a call for 30 minutes and talk through it? Who's going to say no to that? Like, I mean, sure, some people will, but you're not selling at that point. You're not selling the service. All you're doing is building up credibility and building up trust.
Yeah, and say that it's 1 out of 3 people or 1 out of 5 people that says yes to that. It's a much higher conversation rate than when you're just cold calling people out of the blue. And it's going to be much less adversarial conversation when they do say yes, and much higher likelihood that it's going to lead to a sale and lead to a sale faster. So it's not just about the closing a deal, but it's that you've built that rapport and you're going to close deals faster that way too. Did post a link in the chat or in the comments on LinkedIn. If you want to jump on live with us, go ahead and follow that link. You can join us live and ask your questions or get feedback if you think this was ridiculous and you think we're crazy, then get on and let's talk about it. That'd be fun too. But if you have a question or a thought, or even if you want some advice maybe for your own projects that you're working on, jump on and we'll chat about it. But then I think one thing, Mike, that you talked about that's interesting is this works to build relationships with people offline also. So, I've used this before myself, where it was at an event and we made a card with a QR code on it about a downloadable that we created in my previous job, and people loved it. And they could actually fill out by hand the calculator, and it gave the calculations on it, but then they could use the QR code and go to the online document calculator that we had. And people really loved it. They got a kick out of it, much better than our brochures or whatever else we were using. And again, conversation starter for people. And then, they could potentially be using our branded thing on a daily basis to be making calculations for their job, which is great. And then another part is, you said some people are really great at starting conversations, and that's true in person, but very few people, that doesn't translate online very well. Very few people are good at starting cold conversations online unless it's in some kind of a closed community. And so this is a way to be able to take that, the same thing that you're getting when you go in person and build relationships with people, and it's moving it to the online space and helping those people who are great conversationalists to get that initial conversation so they can take it from there.
Well, we were literally talking about this with, like, in the same conversation I mentioned a little earlier. We were talking about this with a client, and we asked them, like, hey, when you think of social selling, what do you think? And the president of that organization says, I think of the spammy, LinkedIn messages all the time. Like, literally, that's what people think about. The bar is so freaking low. Like, it really is, because what most people, as Joseph was mentioning earlier, are looking for the hacks. They're looking to automate. They're looking to whatever. They're playing the typical numbers game. They're not looking to build the relationship. So just doing a very basic thing and changing that mindset automatically sets you apart from literally everybody else out there. The bar is that low, especially in certain industries.
Well, Aaron, our colleague, had a great comment here. I'll just put it on the screen while we're chatting. Talks about how the challenge with cold calling is that when you cold call a buyer today, they're locked into a contract for 9 months. They literally can't buy today, even if they want to. That's why you need to focus on building the relationship along the way. So when they're ready to buy, they already trust you when they're ready for that sales combo. Exactly.
And also, that gets into, like, I want to poo-poo cold calling. I suck at it. I would never do it. I don't enjoy getting cold called. I don't agree with it. However, I think it can be successful if the rest of these pieces are in play. If you are doing some of these things that we're talking about, if you're running events, if you're creating experiences like, custom playing cards that you're putting out there, if you are creating these value add assets that show intent and all this kind of stuff, if once you've done all that and you then get a cold call and it happens to get you when you're ready to buy, you're like, oh yeah, I've heard of Proofpoint, or I've heard of whatever XYZ company, you're much more likely to respond to that call, respond to that email. So I think this is where, people talk about ABM and you have to align on accounts. Yes, you do, but the timing, I think, also needs to be important. Can you create your lists based on explicit intent, not just implied intent? Right? So can you cold call people who have actually maybe taken some sort of action? Right? Maybe you can't get a hold of them any other way, whatever, I don't know. You can cold call them, or you can call, maybe you have contact with one division versus within an organization versus another. Maybe you have contact with a manager level person. You're trying to get to the director or VP, right? Cold calling that VP after all this other stuff is probably going to be much more successful than before, because likely they've seen some of this content internally, either just through kind of how social networks work, or somebody maybe posted a link in Slack or a screenshot or whatever, or mentioned it in a meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's combined. It's being able to combine all these pieces together. I think that's the, people talk about go to market. Well, that's what it is. It's combining inbound and outbound and customer marketing and customer success and lifecycle marketing, all that stuff. It's how do you, as a business overall, go to market, and how can you maximize all these assets and reuse them in various ways? And I think that, we haven't really talked about this yet, but I think a lot of companies over-index on net new content creation because they don't think about it this way. They don't have a process, and like every time they think about, oh, we need a new sales enablement thing, versus, well, what about using this other thing as a sales enablement asset, which again, let's think about more in terms of relationship enablement instead.
Yeah, and actually, it's kind of funny, Mike, because I've created quite a few ebooks in my tenure, and
I think we all have.
it's
Let's
an
admit it. We've all
incredible,
done it.
yeah, it's an incredible lift to get those off the ground. You got to write the content, you have to format it, you have to work with the designer to get it set. And then typically a bunch of layers of approval, and it can be months. I mean, typically when I've worked on them, unless I'm doing it for myself, it's like 3 to 4 months of pretty heavy work to get something like that off the ground. What we're talking about here, creating a worksheet, depending on the level of it, and doing 4 live events around that, it's going to take you like 10% of the time, maybe 20% of the time that it would take.
Even if it takes you 100% of the time, the effectiveness is so much higher.
Yeah, but
that's the idea.
It's just small. If you're going to create a good ebook, maybe if you create one that's like 4 pages and it's literally just to get somebody's contact information. But if you were to create something that's actually going to give value to people, it's going to take you more time than putting something like this together anyway, and have, to your point, way, way less value. All right, final call for people that want to jump on. If you want to jump on and ask a question, follow that link. You can jump in with Mike and I, jump in and ask a question live.
Something while we're waiting for this last call here, it's something we talked about in one of, I don't know, maybe 2-3 months ago in one of our first lives, I think. But this whole concept of gating or not gating content, I think it's worthwhile bringing it up again here, because I think now we're starting to get this almost like the pendulum has swung the other way, and there's this aversion to gating anything. And I'm not going to get into that whole thing. We can post a link to that previous live. It's on YouTube. You can find it. We dive into detail there. But what's worth, I think, pointing out is thinking about, does collecting information and having a sign up or a sign in or something, does that add to the functionality and the value of the asset? Right? So thinking about like, okay, let's even take the very basic worksheet. Let's just say, if you post that worksheet and you gate it and you say, hey, once you download this, we'll follow up with whatever, a set of 3 videos to walk you through how to fill this out. Most people won't necessarily say no to that. And it's not like you say, we won't send you anything else. Like that's the only thing you're going to get. Okay. The value of that follow-up and that extra video content enhances the value of that overarching asset. And then you can follow up and say, hey, you can look at, did they watch the videos? Did they not? Right. Ideally, because it's almost like a mini course kind of thing. Right. And then with the course, being able to put in your email, maybe that saves where they're at, like in terms of where they're at in the video. Maybe it's a 25-minute video. Hey, they only got through the first 10 minutes of it. It saves that time. They don't have to remember it, bookmarks it, whatever, something like that. That adds to the functionality. So, and the other aspect to think about is, can you get that contact data in another way? In a lot of industries you can, but there are some industries where you can't. As an example, you probably heard Joseph and I talk about this in the past. We have a client who's working with emerging biotech. Most of these companies are in stealth mode. They don't have a name. Like, you don't know who they are. You can't target them on social. You can't really buy a list per se. You could buy a list from a conference potentially, but even then, most of them is like, you can't target them any other way. So you need to collect contact info. And there are other industries that are very similar situations.
Well, healthcare providers.
Yeah. Healthcare providers are another one that's really hard. Yeah. So anyway, I want to belabor the point on gating, but I think it's something important to think about when you're thinking through this process is you're going to probably want to gate something as a lead in so that you can understand the intent and easily follow up with them.
Yeah, I mean, and really, if it's a resource that isn't available somewhere else easily and makes that person's life easier, you can pretty much gate it, and there's still going to be a good amount of people that will download it. And without that layer, it can be really challenging to be able to follow up with them after. And yeah, that yeah, I could keep going.
I mean,
I'll leave it
yeah,
there.
you've got retargeting and all this kind of stuff, but it can only go so far and all that jazz. All right. Was there anything? I'm trying to think if there's anything else we wanted to talk about related to this.
I mean, I'll just say that a lot of our customers and a lot of people in the consulting space, when you talk to them, how did they get most of their business? The majority of them, it's through relationships and referrals. And even when they have a sales team, you talk to their top sales reps, or you talk to the customers with their top sales reps, it's a relationship. In fact, I can think of somebody right now that I know locally who's very successful sales guy in the cybersecurity industry, and he runs a sales team. And I was talking to him the other day, and he's talking about how who was it that they were talking to? I want to say it was either LinkedIn Sales Navigator or Zoom Info or one of these guys, but they brought them down to their corporate office, and the guy's got a picture of him at one of these major golf clubs out there. I don't know that much about golf, but my friend knew exactly which one it was, and they're talking about golf, and they're buddy about that, and it helped close the deal with his company, and it was like $100,000 deal probably or more, and a huge portion of that is off of building that rapport and that relationship. And that's what makes the sales team valuable, is when you have people who have that rapport and they've been building those relationships over a decade or two or three. And those are the power player salespeople that you want to bring in on your team, right? So this is a way to bring that same level of value to your, like Mike was saying earlier, your younger sales team. It's how do you start building that relationship? And in technical B2B, in consulting, in complex industries, they're not going to just go to a review site and do some online research and make a decision. They have complicated requirements. Typically, they already have relationships with other vendors that they've been working with. There's a lot of times buying committees and different people that are involved. And if you don't have a relationship, most of the time, they're not going to be thinking about it right. They're going to be using their own internal matrix to define their requirements. And a lot of times it comes down to price or some other factor that's outside of your control. Whereas if you can get in early, you could be building relationship with multiple people on their team, with the peers of the people that you're trying to get to buy. It's just, you're so much more likely to have success.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this all the time, and you hear it talked about a lot, right? It's, people work with those they know, like, and trust. And it's those things, especially, any time a buying decision is being made, somebody is putting their neck out there and staking, sort of saying, this is the right decision. If this thing fails, they might get fired. Not in every situation, let's just say, right? But they're putting, their professional clout on the line. They're putting their job on the line, et cetera, et cetera. So the best way to get past that is to build that relationship. And you can do it at scale. And I think that's the big misnomer out there. It's like, oh, you can't scale referrals, or referrals aren't scalable. I think the way that people traditionally think about them, it's not scalable. And, also, like, yeah, if you're talking about a Fortune 100 company, yeah, there's only so far a referral system. I'm not talking about a referral program, because, yeah, a referral program can only be one part of your thing. But scaling the system that drives referrals, at a certain point hits a plateau. I mean, everything does. But I would say for most, call it small to mid-sized companies, I think there's a big misnomer that referrals can't be scaled. I think they can, and the way to do it is by scaling relationships, right? It's scaling digital word of mouth. That's really what we're talking about at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think it's easy to think. A lot of sales can be pretty manipulative, and I think it's easy to feel like, well, you're using people. But I mean, in my experience, when you start focusing more on the relationship than on the transaction, you get outside, you get out of that, you know. And I think it's a lot of times people in marketing, they don't want to be cold pitching people, you know. And I kind of similar to Mike, I have an aversion to cold calling and cold pitching, and part of it's just my personality. I don't like doing that. It's kind of against my nature to do that, but I still want to be able to build relationships with people, and I still want to be able to, you know, successfully grow the business. And you can do that really effectively by creating the right kinds of content.
You know, something that kind of popped into my head right now is the companies that are pretty much either strictly focused on a sales motion, like an outbound motion, or separate out their outbound sales motion from what marketing is doing. What they're really forcing is they're putting the relationship second, meaning I first need to try to pitch you to get you to agree to try to build a relationship with me. Because I think everybody understands that you have to build a relationship, otherwise they're not going to buy. I think you will probably struggle to find somebody that doesn't agree with the statement of, you know, people buy from those they know, like, and trust. Every salesperson generally, I would say, believes that. And they try to do that, but they do it after the fact. What if you flip it? Change the mindset. Build a relationship first. Have marketing create a system that allows you to do that upfront and at scale, so that when you do reach out, there's some semblance of a relationship already there. Either with you personally, maybe you were able to do it through personal branding, or with the ideas that your company is putting out there, or with other people within the organization, right? I mean, how much easier would it be, like, I'm going to make this up, if I were to cold call somebody, which I won't, I don't like it, I will not do it. But let's assume I did. How much better would that cold call be if I reached out to somebody that already had a relationship with you, Joseph? Right? So, or vice versa. So I think it's that idea. It's putting the relationship up front rather than behind the interaction.
I mean,
it comes down to the mindset.
Why you build a personal brand too. It's the same. It's kind of in the same wavelength. Like, I can think of a handful of people off the top of my head that if they cold pitched me on LinkedIn, even if it was a horrible cold pitch, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to get on with you. Been following your content for a long time. Even if I think they're not going to buy, I want to get on with them, and I want to talk with them and know them because I've been following them. And I have people all the time reach out and go, oh, let's grab a coffee or let's connect in a cold pitch. And I just ignore it most of the time. I got a limited time in the day. But if somebody's engaged with, like, say somebody commented on something and it was meaningful, and it wasn't just like an excuse to pitch me, and then they reach out and say, hey, I really appreciate that. I'm trying to do X, Y, Z. Would you be open to jumping on a call with me? 100%. Absolutely. Yep. I'll do that.
Yeah. So let me really quickly, I know we're planning on wrapping up here. Here's a few other tactical things. Again, I want to give people some tactical advice here, but again, as I mentioned, don't bastardize these, please. So let's take the event, like the live event playbook, for example. People sign up. You can reach out to them and say, hey, thanks for signing up for such and such event. What are you hoping to get out of it? Or what do you that kind of question. Again, there's a bunch of different variations of that. You'll be surprised about how many people respond. I mean, I do this quite often, and probably about 50% plus response rate, I would say, on something like that. So that, again, it allows you to use that for outbound. And a lot of these people I don't like, I use that for both people I am already connected to and people I've never met with. As a follow-up, you can do, hey, thanks for joining the event. What did you think? We kind of talked about that. You can, if you have this other, downloadable type thing or course or whatever, kind of conversation starter, if you will, you can follow up with that. Hey, thanks for joining the event. If you found this content useful, thought you might benefit or you might like this, right? And then you can follow up as the next thing. So it allows you to create all these various plays for your sales team, or whether it's SDRs, BDRs, if it's, in the consulting space, you're then it's probably the managing directors that are doing all this kind of stuff. But it allows you to have these types of plays to pre-post follow-up, pre-post conversation starter, download or access, follow-up. And again, the goal is you're just trying to start a conversation, because a conversation, if you do it the right way and you create the right assets, that becomes your discovery. People will, you'll be amazed the kind of information people will volunteer if they feel like it's going to help them. People will tell you all sorts of stuff. They'll tell you about their revenue targets. They'll tell you about their challenges. They'll tell you about team structure problems. I mean, I've had executives tell me all sorts of stuff when I wasn't pitching. And then you can pitch based on that, because now they've trusted you enough to tell you this, sometimes even like proprietary information they probably shouldn't be telling you. Where if you were reach out to them cold, they'd be like, oh no, please sign an NDA first.
Right.
So I'm gonna leave it at that. Joseph, any last parting words for our listeners?
Yeah, I guess the thing is, I'd say the hardest thing about this process from a marketing perspective is getting your sales team to buy into it. And I would just posit this question to a salesperson. Would you rather talk to 5 or 10 people and pitch them, where they're not going to be interested in what you're talking about, or talk with 1 or 2 people who you're being positioned automatically as the trusted advisor? Which one of those scenarios is more likely to lead to business? And if they say the first, then maybe you need a new sales team, but that's not a problem we could solve for you. But if they say the second, it's like, well, let's try this out. Let's pilot something. Let's do 1 or 2 events. You can get on with me. I'll interview you about, this topic, and then we'll create an asset that will help you get on with people or have a good reason to reach out to people so that you could advise them. And instead of jumping on 5 demos or 10 demos with people who you gave a gift card to, that aren't going to buy from you, instead you could jump on and just be open and give free advice to people in your area of expertise, and then let the cards fall where they will. And I guarantee you have 2 to 5 of those calls, you're going to get way more progress than you will from a bunch of typical leads that sales teams need to follow up with.
All right. That is a great place to end things. Thank you all for joining. If you've got questions, reach out to Joseph and I directly. If you'd like, we're obviously on LinkedIn. You can email us and all that kind of fun stuff. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you all next week at this. Actually, you know what? I'm going to, for anybody still listening, or if you're listening to this later, I'd love to hear from you. Are you getting value out of these? And then the other thing I'd like to hear is, does this time work for people? Because I have a feeling that this is not the best time with all the various time zones. And we've kicked around moving these to either earlier mornings or later afternoons. So if you're watching this, shoot me a message, shoot Joseph a message, whatever, and let us know if there's a better time for you. I'll probably post a poll at some point to get people's feedback too. So anyhow, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week.